Tiff. This isn't Noah's Ark. Then what did the scans find? There's only one thing that practically every ancient civilization documented, not a specific deity, not a system of government, not a moral code. One thing, a flood, a deluge that destroyed everything. A story about a man who built a boat, a narrative about salvation in the midst of catastrophe. The Babylonians told it, the Hindus told it, the Greeks, the Chinese, the indigenous peoples of the Americas. More than 80 different cultures, scattered across continents that never had contact with one another, describe essentially the same thing. Water that came. Total destruction. A small group that survived because they were prepared. The question that archaeologists cannot stop asking is simple. Why? Why is this narrative so universal? Why do so many different people tell essentially the same story? The answer that science is finding now is both more mundane and more profound than anyone expected. Let us begin in the worst possible place to look for answers. A mountain 5,000 meters high, covered in snow year-round, in a border region that is simultaneously sacred and dangerous to multiple religions. Mount Ararat. The very mountain where Christian and Islamic tradition claim that the Ark came to rest. For more than a century and a half, adventurers, believers, and yes, even some scientists made the dangerous journey to that summit. Most came back empty-handed. Some came back with stories. One came back with wood. In 1955, a French adventurer named Fernand Navarra descended that mountain with samples of ancient wood. He claimed to have found a wooden structure preserved in layers of ice and soil. Initial radiocarbon tests suggested that the wood was approximately 5,000 years old. The date would correspond perfectly with when, according to biblical tradition, Noah would have lived. Navarra returned to the mountain in 1956. He found more wood, he published books, he gave lectures around the world. It was exactly the discovery that many people wanted to hear. But here is the problem with awakening hope. When independent scientists retested that same wood years later, the result was devastating. It was not 5,000 years old, it was approximately 600 years old. It had come from an ancient Christian cemetery near the mountain. Buried in the soil for centuries, it had become contaminated. The original test had presented a methodological error that less scrupulous or merely less rigorous researchers had not detected. In one stroke, what was promising became problematic. But Fernand Navarra was not alone. The decades that followed saw the pattern repeat continuously. Someone would return with aerial photographs that supposedly showed structures. Someone would publish precise coordinates of where the Ark was. Someone would gather funding based on a supposed discovery. And then, under closer scrutiny, the evidence would evaporate. It was not what it appeared to be. It was a rock. It was a natural geological formation. It was an exaggerated interpretation of a shadow in a photograph. The mainstream scientific community began to treat Ararat as a hobby of well-intentioned eccentrics, not as a site of serious investigation. And then something changed. Because this is where you need to understand something crucial about how modern technology has transformed archaeology. The tools we now possess would be magic to archaeologists from 50 years ago. Magnetometers that can detect anomalies in Earth's magnetic field with nanotesla precision. Satellites with such high resolution that they can read license plates from hundreds of kilometers above. Drones equipped with thermal cameras that reveal buried structures through temperature differences. Ground-penetrating radar that can see through 50 meters of compacted soil. With these tools, researchers like scientist Porcher Taylor III from the University of Richmond returned to examine Mount Ararat in the early 2000s with fresh eyes, not as a true believer seeking a miracle, but as an archaeologist seeking material evidence. What they found was intriguing. Signs of magnetic anomalies at the site, not across the entire mountain, in a specific zone, in an area that corresponded with historical tradition and oral narratives of where the Ark would have landed. These anomalies were not explainable by simple natural geological phenomena. There was something buried down there, something that distorted the magnetic field in a way consistent with a large metallic structure or mineralized wood. But repeat after me this very important phrase: a magnetic anomaly is not Noah's Ark. A magnetic anomaly is a magnetic anomaly, nothing more. It could be many things: a mineral outcropping with unusual geomagnetic properties, a volcanic formation, fragmented remains of multiple structures deposited over centuries, debris from ancient human occupation mixed with geological material, volcanic basalt, iron concentrated naturally. But it is real, it is detectable. And it raises a question that no one had really investigated in a systematic way. What if there really was something there buried? For real? To understand why this question matters, you need to understand the geological and climatic context of that place. Approximately 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, Earth underwent dramatically rapid climatic transformations. Ocean levels rose hundreds of meters, river systems overflowed continuously, regions that depended on stable rainfall patterns suffered droughts or catastrophic floods. The Levant and Mesopotamia region was particularly affected. Approximately 7,600 years ago specifically, two geophysicists from Columbia University, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, proposed a hypothesis that became central to understanding these ancient flood narratives. They studied geological evidence of the Black Sea and suggested there was an extraordinary catastrophic event. Imagine a geography different from what we know now. The Black Sea was, in that period, at a lower level than the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean. There was a natural isthmus that separated it. Prosperous communities lived around its shores. It was fertile, it was abundant. And then, at some point, the rising level of the global ocean reached a critical point. The isthmus that separated the Black Sea from the Mediterranean began to undermine itself. Pressure increased, until at a certain moment that might have taken weeks or months, the natural barriers gave way. When it happened, the water from the Mediterranean, saltier and heavier, began to flow into the Black Sea, not like a river, like a colossal waterfall. Estimates suggest that the Black Sea level rose 200 to 250 meters in just a few years, perhaps less. Imagine living in a coastal village at that time, waking up and seeing water where there had been land. There were no weather warnings. There were no orderly evacuations. There was only death, destruction, extinction of entire communities. The people who survived fled. They ran inland. They climbed mountains. They sought high points, the mountains they could see from far away, like Ararat, and they carried with them stories, stories of terror, stories of survival, stories that were told and retold, each retelling adding mythological layers. These stories dispersed through trade routes, through population migrations, through people who left the Black Sea region and distributed themselves across Asia, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Each culture that received them adapted them, incorporated them into their own cosmologies, connected them with their own gods and beliefs. But the central kernel remained. A devastating flood, a man warned, a boat, salvation of a small group. The Babylonians recorded this in the Epic of Gilgamesh, dated to approximately 2100 before Christ. In that text, a man named Utnapishtim receives warning from the gods of a coming flood. He builds a boat, gathers his family and animals, survives while water covers the world. When the boat runs aground, he sends a bird to check if there is dry land. That story was written in Mesopotamia, in a time and place that had no official contact with the Hebrew Bible. Yet it tells essentially the same narrative, and it comes before the biblical version was written. The Hebrews, when compiling their religious texts, had access to this Mesopotamian tradition. They reinterpreted it through their own monotheistic lens, created the version we know in Genesis, a singular God, a man named Noah, specific and exact. But the narrative structure is the same. The coincidences are not coincidences, they are echoes, layers of transmission of an original traumatic and real experience. Now, here's the most intriguing archaeological question. If these stories have roots in a real geological event, and if people really did flee to Mount Ararat during that event, it is plausible that they would have built structures there, shelters, warehouses, yes, possibly even boats if water had reached that altitude. It is plausible that those structures were buried by Ararat's subsequent volcanic eruptions, or by landslides, or simply by centuries of soil and debris accumulation. It is plausible that these structures left a detectable magnetic signature. And it is plausible that when you search in a specific place with modern technology, you find exactly that. Mount Ararat is, in geological terms, in the right place. It is a prominent mountain that would serve as a point of reference. It is near the sites of documented Mesopotamian floods. It is in a zone where population migrations would have passed during climatic crises. It is sacred in multiple religious traditions, which suggests that significance has ancient roots. And there is a magnetic anomaly there. It is not proof of Noah. It is not proof of miracle. It is not proof of the literal historicity of the biblical narrative, but it is a window. It is a possibility. What makes all of this even more fascinating is understanding why serious investigation has been so limited. If you announce that you are going to excavate Mount Ararat looking for Noah's Ark, you face immediate ridicule. Your academic colleagues question you. Your funding disappears. You are associated with pseudoscience and sensationalism. Therefore, serious researchers tend to call it investigation of geomagnetic anomalies and keep the analysis of results quiet. They never announce discovery of the Ark because they know they will not find that specific answer. But if they find an ancient structure, a structure that dates to the right time period, a structure that could have been a ship or a large-scale shelter, that would be the archaeological discovery of the century. Not because it would prove religion, but because it would close the gap between myth and history in such a clear way that it would be impossible to ignore. Think about it. For millennia, entire cultures have been built around the idea that the Ark rests in a specific place. Christians made pilgrimages. Muslims documented the tradition. Researchers spent entire careers searching. The mountain became synonymous with the story. What if that century-old cultural obsession was, in fact, a distant echo of something that really happened, not necessarily as described in religious texts, but as a real event that marked a community so deeply that the memory endured through generations? Here is what we know factually. Number 1. There is evidence of significant magnetic anomalies on Mount Ararat in locations that correspond with historical tradition. This was detected through rigorous scientific methodology. Number 2. These anomalies require direct investigation to be fully understood. Currently, no comprehensive excavation has been authorized. Number 3. There is solid geological evidence that catastrophic floods really did occur in the Mesopotamian region 7,000 to 10,000 years ago. Number 4. Flood stories in 80 or more ancient cultures probably originate from real geological events that impacted real populations. Number 5. None of this proves the existence of Noah as a historical person or the existence of a universal flood that destroyed all life on Earth. But let me be clear. If they dig in that place and find a substantial, ancient wooden structure, if that structure dates from between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, if the size and design were consistent with a transport vessel or an emergency shelter, that would change everything. It would not change theology. It would not prove miracle. It would not convert skeptics. But it would prove that there was a factual kernel inside the mythology, that our ancestors were not simply fantasizing, that when they told stories about a flood and a boat, they were recalling something that really happened to their people. And perhaps, in a world saturated with narratives disconnected from reality, perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it is important to know that sometimes the stories we tell about ourselves begin with something true. The technology is there. The magnetometers keep working. The satellites keep orbiting. That anomaly is not going away. It remains detectable, silent, waiting. One day, possibly in your lifetime, someone will ask the final question. The question that breaks the silence in that place. Do you want to know the truth? And then, finally, we will dig.